Tonight, is the world's most hated man coming back to Canada? It's February 3rd, and you're watching The Ezra Levant Show.
Why should others go to jail when you're the biggest carbon consumer I know?
There's 8,500 customers here, and you won't give them an answer.
You come here once a year with a sign, and you feel morally superior.
The only thing I have to say to the government about why I publish it is because it's my bloody right to do so.
Last summer, I interviewed Dariush Valizadeh, also known as Roosh V, the self-described pickup artist. A pickup artist is someone who gives other men tips on how to get dates, or to be more blunt, how to get a girl to agree to have sex. By definition, that's going to upset people's sensibilities. And Roosh's advice is particularly cold-blooded. He's not a romantic. He's self-published a series of books on the subject, sort of like Donald Trump's Art of the Deal, but all his negotiation tactics are about getting sex, not getting money. Naturally, some people don't like that, especially some women, either because they think his advice is insulting or that it's accurate, or both. But after years of sparring with feminists, I think Roosh has become a sort of performance artist who actually goes out of his way to enrage the left, especially feminists, especially social justice warriors, those virtue-signaling busybodies who professionally find offense everywhere. Roosh has been doing the pickup thing for so long, I think he's bored by it. Frankly, it wouldn't surprise me to learn that he's married. Now, I think his new hobby is being an internet troll, just to get a reaction. I actually think he's on a mission to show how politically correct the world has become, how censorious and how foolish. That's the reason I interviewed him last summer, not because I'm terribly interested in the bar scene, but because in reaction to him coming to Canada to give a couple of speeches to a small group of his fans, literally tens of thousands of Canadian social justice warriors signed a petition to keep him out of the country, which is strange because that's not really how it works. I believe in borders, but not for having internet votes on who gets to cross them. Mobs of feminists literally stalked through Montreal looking for Roosh, and on one occasion, a drink was thrown in his face. In Toronto, he managed to evade capture and talk to a few dozen men, but not before the mayor and aldermen and provincial cabinet ministers all condemned him and demanded that private hotels and conference centers not rent a room to him. Here's Toronto Alderman Norm Kelly, who wrote, urging all venue locations in Toronto to deny Roosh the opportunity to use their space. He and his views are not welcome in Toronto. That's from that last summer. I suppose that's not the same as legally banning someone from a city, but does it not irk you just a little bit that a politician announces that certain views that he alone chooses are not welcome in a city? So that's why I interviewed Roosh last August. Well, guess what? Here we go again. As Marx said, history repeats itself, the first time as tragedy, the second as farce. And look at this. Roosh tweeted what looked like an airplane ticket to Australia. And that's all it took. The social justice warriors down under went nuts. I mean, take a quick look at this guy.
For the past 48 hours, Australia has been under attack by a pro-rape internet troll who's threatening to come to our country. What he has to say is intentionally shocking, and it's had many of us taking to social media to express our outrage. And that's why this is something that we shouldn't talk about. Okay, let's agree on a few things. This guy here, Dariush Valizadeh, or Roosh V, is sexist, provocative, homophobic, elitist, smug and offensive.
For the next 5 minutes, he goes on about how awful it is that people are talking about Roosh and that no one should talk about him except him for 5 minutes. Well, social justice warriors like that, they got all revved up. And before long, the politicians down under did a repeat of Canada's mob. The Australian immigration minister actually had a briefing on whether or not Roosh had applied for a visa to travel to Australia. Take a look.
Australia doesn't welcome people to our country who disrespect women, and the department in the past has made decisions to cancel visas of people that advocate violence.
Online, he fired back, tweeting, "I'll just take a private boat to Darwin from Indonesia or East Timor. I'll find a way to enter. I won't be stopped."
His suggestion that rape should be legal inside private property, not even our own homes, but just in private property generally, is just so offensive and so undermines the whole criminal code.
All because Roosh made a tweet of a plane ticket? You know what a tweet is, right? It's like a very short Facebook status update you make online. That's all it took to muster an Australian cabinet minister. So then Roosh made this tweet as performance art. He drew a little picture of Australia and said he was going to come by boat where the huge arrows were. And then he said he was looking to hire a military-style naval landing craft, and he made this silly video, and you'll see here in a second, his head is photoshopped on a military landing craft. I mean, I don't know where Roosh is. He's probably sitting at home in the States somewhere, watching TV and eating pizza, while tweeting little jokes and watching half the world go crazy. And by go crazy, I mean like this guy. Look, the commissioner in charge of border security for all of Australia, sort of like their Coast Guard, actually tweeted back to Roosh, warning that the Navy had made note of his plan of attack. Have they all gone mad? Oh, and while he was whipping Australia into a frenzy, he was doing the same thing in New Zealand. Here's a New Zealand newspaper interviewing someone calling Roosh a terrorist who should be banned from the country. Oh, and Holland, too, where one terrified newspaper shows the place where Roosh might be coming for a meeting because some Roosh followers might go there. And, of course, Canada, too. Canada, where the moral panic is perhaps the most fever pitch. All the politicians who didn't get in on the frenzy last August had a chance for a do-over. So here's Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson saying Roosh, or those who would meet to discuss his pickup tips, are a, quote, hate group not welcome in city buildings. As in, if you are a citizen of Ottawa and a taxpayer, if you read Roosh's blog and want to talk to others who do, you cannot go on city property. I think that's what that tweet means. Well, you know how our selfie-loving, Twitter-loving mayors are in this country. So Calgary's mayor, Naheed Nenshi, joined in and replied to Watson's tweet and said, that goes double for Calgary. So anyone who likes Roosh is double banned from Calgary property. Banned twice, you're banned twice. So then John Tory of Toronto, he replied to Nenshi's tweet and wrote, no place for intolerance, hatred, and misogyny in Toronto. I'm with you, Nenshi and Watson. It's a mania. It's contagious. Vancouver's mayor got in on it too. I'm only shocked that Justin Trudeau hasn't done a tweet or a press conference in his substitute drama teacher voice yet, like William Shatner. You know, here's just some girl on the internet who recorded a 7-minute video of herself and her cat crying.
I'm sorry. I am so frustrated right now. This whole Roosh V thing is just like driving me insane.
That cattail was perfect. You know, she means it though. Just like John Tory and Naheed Nenshi and Jim Watson and the Australian Navy and the Australian Immigration Minister and the New Zealanders and the Dutch, and everyone means it. Nenshi means it double as much as Watson means it. And this girl trumped Nenshi by crying. Why? Because Roosh is a pickup artist? Because he's sexist? Why? Well, some of them say it's because Roosh promotes the legalization of rape. Yeah, no, he doesn't. He wrote an article, this one right here, called How to Stop Rape. He starts out by saying, quote, this issue concerns me since I have a sister who I don't want to be raped. He starts by assessing feminism's strange conceptions of a rape culture in the West, and he engages in satire, mocking feminism's fake precautions. It wasn't the funniest of satirical pieces, but like Jonathan Swift's famous essay, advising that we should eat poor people, it was called A Modest Proposal, Roosh uses hyperbole to make a point. Here's how Roosh ends his satire, and I quote, "Less women will be raped because they won't voluntarily drug themselves with booze and follow a strange man into a bedroom." That's what concerns him. Look, satire is hard to do well. It wasn't particularly done well, but anyone who read that essay knew it was satire, unless they don't read it or they don't want to read it because they want the frenzy. They want the chance to prove how feminist they are, how sensitive they are, for men to be white knights riding to the rescue of damsels in distress, for feminists to have a proof point that their version of a rape culture exists in the West. Oh, and they need more money or more power or whatever. Maybe the Australian Navy can convince the government they need a bigger fleet because of Roosh. Maybe the Dutch police can get a bigger budget because of Roosh. Australian TV shows had their most exciting newscast in a month. That girl on her webcam had a good therapeutic cry and got more than 1,000 people watching her video in the first few hours. She's an aspiring journalist and activist. That was sort of like her audition tape. Everyone has their own reasons to join the frenzy, to play the part scripted for them by Roosh. He doesn't even hide his motivations. He was tweeting about all the attention and traffic he was getting. He actually tweeted this graph, all the people in the world searching for his name. It's a laugh, it's a cry, it's politics, it's media, it's the battle of the sexes, it's everything, but there is actually a point underneath it all. And besides telling you this bizarre story for really the second time, the first being in August, the point is actually much clearer to me now, because back in August, when Roosh came to Toronto, he made another performance art video. Here's a few seconds from it. See, Roosh's father is Iranian, so although he clearly does not identify as a Muslim in real life, he made a video where he pretended he was Muslim and said, "Lay off, he's a Muslim, take a look."
All the views that I present on sex, women, and men are basically a light version of Islam, of how Islam does family values. It's a light version of what you can find in the Quran. It's a light version of what has been taught from the Prophet Mohammed. That's all it is. I'm basically introducing traditional Islamic values, traditional Islamic family into a Western audience, because these values are good for women and men. But I'm being attacked in Canada. So what does that tell you? That the Canadian establishment is vehemently Islamophobic. There is no other logical explanation.
He went on in that video to talk about how he was going to seek shelter in a Muslim mosque, and all the feminists hunting him in the streets of Toronto should not violate the sanctity of the mosque. He did this in August, and he was so deadpan about it, I think a lot of people were actually convinced. And you know what? It worked. None of the leftist, feminist, social justice warriors who were hunting him followed him into a mosque. Of course not. Are you crazy? So that was a flicker of dark comedy from Roosh back in August. But around August, September, that was when the massive wave of real Muslim migrants to Europe was just revving up. If you remember, literally 1 million Muslim men just walking through Europe, boating to its shores, just walking in from Turkey, just a massive influx of young, aggressive Muslim men who truly do come from a sexist, misogynistic rape culture, namely the Muslim world. And as we all know, that influx of 1 million young Muslim men has led to the greatest wave of sexual assaults and rapes in Europe since the Second World War. More than 1,000 Muslim men assaulted more than 1,000 German women in the city of Cologne on New Year's Eve. Since then, dozens of similar stories have poured out of Europe, stories that in some cases had been covered up by authorities. So rape culture, true, real rape culture, has arrived in Europe hard, as it's also arriving elsewhere in the West. In Australia, even in Canada, where mass Muslim migration is happening. And do you see my point? 1 million Muslim men are streaming into Europe, including into Holland, where cities like Rotterdam are now nearly 50% Muslim, where hijabs and niqabs are commonplace, where rape culture rules. The Dutch media love the Muslim migrants and cover up the rapes, but they go into full panic mode when Roosh might be coming to town for a little meetup. Australia is practically having an epileptic seizure over Roosh. Their Navy is on alert. Australia, whose top Muslim imam, Taj al-Din Hilali, gave a sermon a few years back in a major Sydney mosque saying if women are raped, it's their fault for not covering up in a burqa. Oh, and unlike Roosh, he was not being satirical. Here, let me quote. If you take out uncovered meat and place it outside on the street or in the garden or in the park or in the backyard without a cover, and the cats come and eat it, whose fault is it? The cats or the uncovered meat? The uncovered meat is the problem. If she was in her room, in her home, in her hijab, no problem would have occurred, unquote. That is not a satire. That is not a metaphor. That is what is really happening in Australia, has been for more than a decade. A lot of Muslim migrants to Australia come from Lebanon, which is where Canada is importing many of our Syrians from these days, by the way. Here, just listen for about 1 minute about how the Lebs, they call them in Australia, have changed Australian beach culture to rape culture in the Sydney surfing mecca of Cronulla.
There's been turf wars for decades on Cronulla Beach between locals and outsiders about who owns the beach. But Mark and his friends say this time it's different. Hey! Because they say the Lebs are different. They pose a threat.
The religious side of it is definitely a big part. The way they're brought up and the way we're brought up, just the way the morals our parents teach us and the morals their parents teach us is completely different.
What's different about the way they're brought up?
I think it's got to do a lot with respect for women.
I can't go to the beach normally and wear what I'd usually wear because when I do, I feel as though I'm getting targeted. Like people saying to me like just names and stuff that I'm being called for wearing a bikini in my own show. Like I've grown up here and I'm local at the beach and I just don't think I should feel like that.
Let me tell you how that story ends. A race riot between Muslim migrants and local Australians over whether or not Sharia law and rape culture was going to come to the beach. So do you see my point now in February 2016? In August of 2015, my point was how gross it was for every politician in Canada to threaten to ban someone from entire cities for having the wrong or offensive views. It was censorship and mob rule and ridiculous. But the story today is a bit different, isn't it? For me, at least. Because all of these deeply concerned people, the sexual assault counselors in Australia, and the one in New Zealand who actually called Roosh a terrorist, well, they don't really speak up about real rape culture in Australia that, yes, really is linked to terrorism, isn't it? Australia's Navy is on high alert for a one-man pretend invasion, but they'll escort in Muslim migrants by the thousand. Oh, and the media. Seriously, if you're interested in the Cronulla riots in Australia, just search on YouTube for Cronulla. I challenge you to find a single media report that doesn't label the white rioters racist for daring to push back against Muslim rapists. That same media has lost their minds this week over one guy. I think it's sublimation. I think it's pent-up emotions. The Western world knows it is being raped by Muslim migrants, but you can't say that. The police department in Cologne, Germany, the morning after 1,000 Muslim men sexually assaulted 1,000 German women, they literally put out a press release calling it an uneventful night. They used the word relaxed. The horrific truth was too huge to remain hidden, so it leaked out. But every day, in 1,000 small ways, we know that rape culture is coming. It's here already. As Taj al-Din Hilali himself said, women wearing a hijab is part of rape culture. It's the only way for women to avoid being raped by Muslims. Every day we see that, and we know that, and we stay silent about it out of political correctness. So everyone is venting a year of real concern about real rapes on Roosh in a display of false concern. I'm not interested in Roosh that much, to tell you the truth. I'm interested in what he exposes. Last August, he exposed the ease with which our politicians would censor offensive speech. And now he exposes that Western feminists don't actually care about rape or rape culture when it is real and dangerous and relentless. They only like to play the part for a brief moment when it's a pickup artist they don't like who's playing them like a fiddle. They'll go back to covering up rapes by migrants and calling bikini wearers on Sydney beaches racists as soon as Roosh is gone. Stay with us for more.
I love Alberta. I've lived here my whole life and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of our free market, pro-business, low-tax, do-it-yourself attitude. And now, I'm watching my province get destroyed. We've all had hints of the NDP's radical views in the past, but no one actually thought they'd ever run this province. Not even them. And now they are. And the worst is yet to come. I give my sad forecast for Alberta in my new ebook, The Destroyers, Rachel Notley and the NDP's War on Alberta. Go to thedestroyers.ca to sign up for your free copy today.
Welcome back to the Ezra Levant Show. You know, I can't help falling in love with Donald Trump, even though as a conservative, I'm not supposed to. Here, take a look at this campaign video put out by the Jeb Bush campaign, making the case that Donald Trump is about as liberal as, or as conservative as, well, Hillary Clinton. Take a look.
I lived in New York City and Manhattan all my life, okay? So, you know, my views are a little bit different than if I lived in Iowa.
Partial birth abortion.
I'm very pro-choice. I am pro-choice in every respect and as far as it goes.
As far as single payer, it works in Canada. It works incredibly well in Scotland.
Hillary Clinton, I think, is a terrific woman. I mean, I'm a little biased because I've known her for years.
Yeah, I know her very well. She's very talented. And
I live in New York. She lives in New York. And I've known her and her husband for years, and I really like them both a lot.
I've seen other clips of Donald Trump saying that he's fine with illegal immigrants and that he would engage in negotiations with Iran. That's on the policy side. And then there's just the personal style. Take a look at this video of Donald Trump, looks like it's from the 80s or 90s, being interviewed on the Howard Stern show. If you know Howard Stern, you know it's about comedy and sex. Here, take a listen.
Who is best? You got number one, Frederique, Stephanie Seymour, Kim Alley, Paulina. Now, who is the best? Where's Marla go?
I think we have to put Marla right up here.
Come on, let's do that. Let's take down Frederique.
I think we have to put Marla right up.
All right, put Marla. Show the video while we put Marla on top. She wins the grand prize.
It's hard to compare the ones that, as you say, you didn't have.
Right.
Let's see, Kim Alley, I don't know.
Take her down.
Stephanie, I know, but I never had.
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera.
All right, so basically, pat her, need her, don't need her, pat her.
Just in case you're wondering what they're doing there, Howard Stern and Donald Trump are ranking Donald Trump's ex-girlfriends and wives. And yet, so many conservatives, and I'll put myself in this category, still believe Donald Trump ought to be the nominee. Now, am I crazy or is there a rationale behind it? Joining me now is Ben Shapiro, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire. Ben, welcome to the show. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us via Skype. Ben, look, I'm a pretty conservative guy. I think I am to the right of Donald Trump on most issues, but I still like him despite his ideological flaws and his personality quirks, because I think he is the only guy tough enough to beat the media establishment that will, in my fear, crush a Marco Rubio or a Ted Cruz or really anyone else. I think only Donald Trump is bigger than the media. Only Donald Trump can resist the politicians' reflexes of apologizing all the time. And on the key issue of our time, radical Islam and open borders, he's solid. That's why Trump's good enough for me. Am I wrong, Ben?
So I think that's actually a well-stated argument for Trump, which is better than a lot of supporters of Trump who've been saying that it's because he's conservative. He's not conservative. If you want to make the case that he's the most electable, that he's a wild man who will hit anybody, then that's at least a reasonable case. He's the guy no one wanted to fight in high school because he might pull out a knife and stab you in the neck. So I get that appeal. You know, as far as immigration, I don't trust him on immigration because he's flip-flopped on it a couple of times. If he changes his mind, it could be different. On radical Islam, I also don't trust him. I mean, this is a guy who 3-4 months ago was saying that we needed to accept a lot of Syrian Muslim refugees, and then as soon as he saw that was unpopular, he flipped to we're accepting 0 Muslim refugees at all from anywhere. So my biggest problem with him is that not that he can't win. I think that he actually is quasi-electable in the crazy situation we're now in. But I think that he is not a conservative. I don't know what his guiding principle is other than the glorification of Donald Trump. So it's not really about making America great again so much as it is about making Donald Trump prominent again.
I accept that, and the man clearly doesn't lack ego, but what politician does? I mean, you first of all, you need self-confidence and self-esteem to be a politician, but really is Hillary any less so, or any of the other Republicans, other than maybe Dr. Carson?
I will say this, I think that if you look at some of the other Republicans, they are at least more consistently conservative on a vast variety of issues than Trump. I mean, Trump is the kind of guy I see flipping his mind on any given issue on any given day. I mean, he's done it on ISIS, where he said originally that Putin should take care of it. Then he said, we'll bomb the blank out of them. He says about China that he's best friends with China, but he wants to put 45% tariffs on China, but he doesn't want to put 45% tariffs on China. The bottom line is this: electability is all well and good, and there's a good case to be made that Trump is electable because he has blue-collar appeal and because he's for higher tariffs and all the rest of this. But that's not an argument that he would be a good conservative president. Would I vote for Trump before I vote for Hillary? Sure, but I'd vote for a flaming pile of dog crap before I vote for Hillary Clinton. So that's really not a fair comparison.
It was such a great field of candidates. I mean, I would be thrilled with President Scott Walker, who's gone, President Carly Fiorina. There's so many quality candidates. Ted Cruz, sure, very conservative guy. There are so many great candidates, but I fear that any one of them is going to be destroyed by the media party, this media political complex. And by the way, Google and Facebook, who are, I think, the real threat to the Republican because of their stealth politicization of their media of communication. The only reason I like Trump is because he is bigger than these things, and I worry these other, it's like Donald Trump and the 15 dwarves. I think they're going to be ground up into powder by the establishment. Am I just too pessimistic? I thought Romney would win in 2012. No chance. Do these other candidates have a chance?
To be honest with you, I have money on Hillary Clinton winning because I'm such a pessimist. I think that Hillary Clinton is look at the Electoral College. Any Democrat has a significant advantage in the Electoral College. Republicans have to win not just Florida, Virginia, and Ohio. They would also have to win Pennsylvania or Michigan or Colorado and Iowa. It is not a really easy road to the presidency for any of these people. Again, I'm not arguing with you that Trump might be the most electable of these folks. I'm just arguing that in a primary, there are two sort of polls that you have to draw on. One is this guy conservative, and two is this guy electable? And for Trump, I just don't think he's conservative. So the electability question, the question is he bigger than the media? Yes, I think he is, to the extent that people know him. Fame is the ultimate inoculation against scandal. And we've seen that with Trump. I mean, he said things that would have killed any other candidate. But that being said, even if he's elected, is he somebody that Republicans want to see elected? Sure, maybe more than Hillary Clinton. But let's say that Marco Rubio is the nominee. A lot of people think that Rubio is electable. Let's say that Ted Cruz is the nominee. Some people think that Ted Cruz is electable. This is a serious calculation. It's sort of chances of winning multiplied by conservatism, and then whatever is the highest statistic from that equation is who you vote for. So if you think that Trump is 90% electable and 10% conservative, does that outweigh the fact that for example, Rubio is 40% conservative and 70% electable?
I like your math. That's a good way of doing it. Gavin McInnes tweeted something sort of funny in that Gavin McInnes way. He said, what if after all this brawling primaries, Rubio is the winner? He said, well, it would be like if my son came out as gay. I'd sort of think about it for a while and embrace him because I love him. I thought that was a funny analogy. Look, any of these Republicans who become the nominee are going to be embraced by the Republican Party that is so desperate to end 8 years of Obama. And the more conservative, the better, as far as I'm concerned. But if you look, Ben, you said it yourself. If you were betting on Hillary Clinton, Trump is the only one big enough. And let me close on this point. You say he's chaotic. That's a phrase that Jeb Bush uses. He calls Trump the candidate of chaos. And yes, it's obviously true. Do you want a bull in the china shop? Well, my answer is, if most of the establishment pottery that he's going to knock off the shelf are things we don't like, whether it's the United Nations, whether it's the Kyoto Protocol, whether it's dealings with Mexico or military matters. If most of the things are if Congress, if the courts, if most of the other institutions that he might pick a fight with as the schoolyard bully are things we want smashed, I mean, maybe that's too much of a risky gamble approach. Maybe that's not the definition of conservatism at all. But Ben, don't you need a brawler when the whole world is against you?
Well, I do think you need a brawler. I think the problem with Donald Trump is, as you say, it's not just that he hits the right people. He also hits the wrong people. I mean, Donald Trump, as I've said for months, he's a hammer in search of a nail. Sometimes that means he hammers the nails like a Jorge Ramos or the Republican establishment. Sometimes it means he hammers a puppy when he's going after Ted Cruz over being Canadian or something. I mean, who knows who he would select for the Supreme Court, for example. The problem with an ego candidate is that he becomes an ego president. And unlike Obama, he's actually free of ideology. But President Trump would be. So, this is the question. I also think there's a secondary calculation. Okay, let's say Hillary becomes president and whoever we nominate loses on the Republican side. What do you want this election to have been about? Do you want it to have been about just another, we ran the guy who we thought we could win and then he lost election? Or is it a remaking election where you actually take the Republican Party and remold it along more conservative lines? See, there are a lot of people right now who are saying that they want this election to look a lot more like kind of 1992 than 1964. And my contention is that 1964 led the way to Ronald Reagan. If this election is a decision between losing narrowly with a candidate we think is the most electable and losing big with the more conservative candidate who's going to destroy the party where it stands and remake it, I pick the latter.
Well, fair enough. I just don't think America has got an extra 4 years to go down the wrong path. Ben, you're one of the smartest guys we know. We're always grateful to have you on the show. Ben's the editor-in-chief of thedailywire.com. Stay with us, folks. More after these words.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know the Rebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to therebel.media/store to find out more.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
Welcome back. One of the things that bothers me the most about the political situation in Canada is not the partisan defeat of October 19th federal election or even the May election in Alberta. What bothers me the most is that we don't have non-partisan groups fighting for freedom. In the media, we're trying to fill that role here at The Rebel. In popular culture and at universities. Well, one of the double problems is at university law schools. And joining me now to talk about a possible solution is Joanna Barron from the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
We love the Canadian Constitution Foundation. You just joined them, right?
I did just this week, in fact, as the director of the Runnymede Society, which we're here to discuss, which is a very exciting and very ambitious program.
Well, let's just remind our viewers about the Canadian Constitution Foundation. That's different than John Carpay's Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. You guys have been around longer. Tell me a little bit about some of the fights you've had. Then we'll talk about your specific project.
Yeah, so the Canadian Constitutional Foundation is a nonpartisan but freedom-oriented think tank. We do interventions. We've done healthcare interventions. Currently, we have a healthcare intervention out of British Columbia.
By intervention, you mean suing? Going to court?
Well, yes. I mean, representing in court on behalf of sort of like freedom-oriented policy positions that we feel have a broader public interest dimension. So as
an intervener before, a friend of the court, you go and you say, Your Honor, here's some arguments that the actual party might not make, but we think you ought to take into consideration.
Precisely.
The left does that a ton, by the way.
Yes, they do. And, the CCF takes a very sort of like strong libertarian freedom-oriented approach to its interventions.
So you just joined, now you just came from private practice as a lawyer. Mm-hmm. What would make you leave the actual cut and thrust of private law to go into a public interest law firm? What makes you tick? Why would you say, I want to fight these causes as opposed to go make a lot of dough?
Well, I mean, making a lot of dough has its time and place, but what I realized was I was an advocate, I was a criminal defense counsel, and I loved it, I relished it. But what I realized was that I was passionate about advancing causes of freedom and advancing arguments that tended towards liberty, and I enjoyed working with clients and working with individuals, but my passion was in the sort of broader public interest arguments, which if that's where your heart is, then you really ought to, take up a broader mandate than your individual client and your individual case. And the opportunity to sort of start the Runnymede Society, which is for all intents and purposes a grassroots startup initiative, was just too exciting to pass up.
And I have to say, you're one in a million for doing that, and we have so few freedom entrepreneurs. That's what you're doing. So Runnymede, just remind our viewers who that rings a bell. Runnymede, that was where the Magna Carta was signed. That was the name of the field, right?
Yes, so it's a water meadow where the Magna Carta was sealed, and it really, we've named our group the Runnymede Society to drive home freedom and the rule of law as the bedrock foundational principles. It's not going to be an organization that is partisan at all. Not going to be an organization that ascribes to any set of policy mandates, but rather if there's any sort of underlying ethos, it would be that policy ought to be guided by principles rather than principles being sort of melded around in order to fit specific desired policy objectives, which we say is unfortunately the state of much of Canadian jurisprudence.
Our friend John Robson recently produced a documentary on the Magna Carta, and we have to remind Canadians that is our legal heritage. Okay, so we've talked about the CCF, we've talked about you and coming to start the Runnymede Society. So what does it mean for law schools across Canada? When I went to law school way back in the 20th century, students who loved freedom were in the distinct minority. Political correctness was growing. I think things are probably a lot worse today. So if you were going to start a campus club, what would it look like, and what would you do? What would the activities be? How would you recruit these students? Give me a little bit of what it would be like for like a 20-something law student who wants to love freedom but doesn't know where to go.
So, we're going to start by holding speakers and debates and symposia. And our critique, or particularly my critique, I was in law school just a few years ago, my critique is that the culture is very same. It's sort of like an amorphous group of arguments, and nobody really questions issues of first principle, like
think-alikes.
Exactly. Should the Supreme Court even be I had a Freudian slip when I said legislating, but deciding matters that perhaps are rightfully within the bailiwick of the legislature. In the United States, whether on the left or right, whenever there's a big issue before the Supreme Court of the United States of sort of social policy importance, such as same-sex marriage, there's always at least one judge who dissents and simply says, we should not be deciding this. Yeah. In Canada, that matter never comes up.
Well, that's a very good point. In the United States, their Supreme Court is very powerful, and it's treated with political accountability. The very harsh scrutiny of candidates, the votes on whether or not the judges will actually make it. Sometimes judges nominated by presidents do not make it to the Supreme Court. And I think you're right. People say this is a very powerful branch of government. It needs to be held to account. There needs to be debate. In Canada, we have a slavish, submissive deference to judges. Now, I think we ought to be respectful of the courts and judges. Do you agree with me? Do you think we're too uncritical of our courts?
Yeah, I remember when I took first-year constitutional law at McGill University Faculty of Law, where I had a great time on the whole. The first case that we were given to read in constitutional law, first-year course, was the Quebec Reference, in which which is an extraordinary case in very many ways. It's a reference. It's not sort of traditionally litigated, but the Supreme Court of Canada gave a sort of essay on the principles of Canadian federalism. And the message to the law student is that we should look to Supreme Court of Canada judges as sort of demigods who can pronounce from the bench about the sort of the essence of Canada as a state. I think that this is a really dangerous tendency, and that's why Runnymede, we'd like to sort of pose an intervention to that sort of dominant wave of thought.
Well, I wish you so much good luck. How can someone join up? How can someone get involved? Is there a good way to contact you or the Runnymede Society? You guys have a website?
Yeah, so we're going to be doing some exciting events in the next 12 weeks this semester at certain Canadian law schools. Our aim is going to be to identify, bright and motivated students that we can identify as student leaders, train them over the summer, and launch officially at the beginning of this academic year in September.
That's really smart. That's a good way to do it.
This semester, we'll be having some really fun events. So if you would like to get involved, whether as a student, as a professor, or just as a friend of Runnymede, you can email me at jbaron, JBARON, @theccf.ca. Otherwise, we hope that we'll be coming to everybody's neighborhood very soon.
Well, I sure hope so. I mean, I'm just thinking of all the law schools that need a deep intervention in this country, and it is a long list. You've got a lot of work to do. Let me close by saying this. About a month and a half ago, I revealed a project I call it For Canada. My goal is to have micro grants to give to freedom-oriented social entrepreneurs, startups, so to speak. And I'd love to talk to you and Marnie, the executive director of the CCF, about how to help fund what you're doing on campuses across Canada. What you're doing is so important if we're ever going to have a long term to bend the curve towards freedom in our courts, which is, I think, where most of our freedoms, it's how most of our freedoms die. Last word to you, Joanna.
I would just say that I totally agree with what you've said. Law is a system of intellectual exchange, and so in order to change or shift the law, we have to change the terms of the intellectual debate.
So nice to have you here. Good luck to what you're doing. Folks, stay with us after these words. You're a viewer mail to me.
So open-minded that the brains have fallen out.
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled.
We've heard you loud and clear. You can't get enough Canadian conservative news and opinion. Why not check out our blog? It's all your favorite conservative bloggers together on a page called The Megaphone. Go to therebel.media/themegaphone or click on the Megaphone menu from our main page to check it out.
Hey, welcome back to the show. This is my favorite part, your viewer feedback. Steve Douglas tweets, "So Timmy's Roll Up the Rim promo is back. Huh. The 7 people still on the Ezra Levant boycott Tim's bandwagon gonna be so ticked." Hi, Steve. I haven't spent a lot of time and effort promoting our huge petition to boycott Tim Hortons since last summer, really. We're a news network, and that's more olds than news now, the moment passed. But I know that I personally have never gone back to Tim Hortons. And I used to literally go every day. And also whenever I would fly at airports, I'd go to get a Tim. So you know what? I get my morning coffee and Egg McMuffin at McDonald's now every day. So that's at least $1,000 that Tim Hortons has lost. I'm not saying all 10,000 or 15,000 or whatever it is, the people who finally signed that petition, I'm not saying they all stayed off Tim Hortons, but I bet 1,000 of them have. So that's $1 million in lost sales. I know that in our office here, no one brings in Tim Hortons. I bet that we're not the only ones who are that way. But the real point was to have a public reaction, to let corporate social justice warriors know that they can't take free pot shots at the oil and gas industry anymore. It was actually never about getting Tim Hortons to change their mind. We detected very early that their strategy was going to be to wait it out no matter what. So our real strategy was to set an example for any other company that was contemplating, well, maybe they'd copy Tim Hortons. Well, we wanted to let them know the PR nightmare they would step into if they followed Tim Hortons. And in fact, no company has followed Tim Hortons' path in the last year, despite attempts by anti-oil sands lobbyists to pressure Air Canada, for example. And hey, the fact that you're still talking about the boycott and writing to me, even though you're obviously pro-Tim Hortons, yeah, that sort of tells me it still stings you a bit, doesn't it? Rob Seward tweets, when it comes to fringe bloggers spreading dangerous retrograde ideas in my city, my main concern is still Ezra Levant. Hi, Rob. I don't actually blog anymore. I haven't since 2011, but I do run an online news network, The Rebel, that has published more than 2,600 videos. In the past year, literally millions of visits and views. I'm not really boasting, I'm just describing what we're doing. It cannot be called fringe by any measure. We've got a couple of videos that have been watched more than 1 million times each. You seem to be watching and despairing at how our message is spreading in your neighborhood. Think about that for a minute. You may say we're fringe, but our ideas only spread when people come to our site and share our videos with other people. So what you're really complaining about is that we're not fringe because so many of your friends and neighbors seem to be watching us. Bud writes, Ezra is too wordy. He is his own worst enemy. Hi, Bud. I am too wordy, which is a blessing and a curse when you're in the talking business. I could surely be more succinct in some of my videos. Others require in-depth coverage. You can always skip ahead, though, unlike watching a show on regular TV. I think I'm so wordy because we live in interesting and terrible times, and powerful and dangerous news happens every day. I have a lot to say because it all causes me to think and feel so much, and I don't want to be anesthetized by the mainstream media, which tells me that, hey, it's all okay. $50 billion deficits by Justin Trudeau, that's okay. Rachel Notley wrecking Alberta, that's okay. Mass unvetted Muslim migration, it's okay. The Islamic State having a country that's now several years old with no signs of being destroyed, that's okay. So I don't believe the world is okay. And words are my main weapon to fight back. Occasionally, we do more than just talk. We have petitions and ads and billboards and books. That too, I guess, is sort of a wordy answer. Hey, what do you think of the show today? What do you think of my treatment of Roosh V? I don't care about pickup artists and dating culture. I am about 20 years too old for all of that. My point is what he shows about us, not about himself. He shows that the West is very quick to censor offensive ideas. It's okay to call Roosh offensive. It's not okay to ban him from your country or censor him or issue edicts banning private vendors, hotels, and conference centers not to let him in. That shows an authoritarian instinct in us, not him. But secondly, and more recently, I think the extreme reaction, calling him a would-be rapist when he clearly is not, shows that we have pent up discussions about rape that we have not yet held, about the mass sexual assaults coming with the Muslim migration through Europe and starting to reach its fingers into North America. That's what I think Roosh has shown this past week. We see all over the Western world where there have been real rapes in the face of silence from authorities, those same authorities being so brave in taking on this paper tiger. That is a valuable lesson, and I don't care who it was who taught it. It happened to be Roosh. But if you disagree, let me know. Send me an email to ezra@therebel.media, Facebook us, or tweet us. That's it for today. Until next time, you keep fighting for freedom. Good night.